Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss The Naked Gun from the Files of the Police Squad, starring Leslie Nielsen, Priscilla Presley, O.J. Simpson, Ricardo Montalban, and George Kennedy, directed by David Zucker. Now, before I get into this review, welcome to the Naked Gun retrospective series, as I haven't done that one yet, and leading up to the new movie starring Liam Neeson, as I've never seen any of these movies, and I'm kind of a newbie, but before I get into it, this was based on a TV show, like, I forget how many years ago this was, about the police squad. And let's see how this goes, because I am curious about this series with this new movie coming out. Let's get into it. In Beirut, we get some terrorists talking about destroying America as Frank Drebin, played by Leslie Nielsen, beats them up in a slapstick way, which is amusing, as it doesn't take itself too seriously, which I liked more than, say, Team America or Tropic Thunder, as he gets out alive. And we move on to Los Angeles, California. We get Officer Nordberg, played by O.J. Simpson. What are you doing here? As he's investigating a plot with the Vincent Ludwig, played by Planet of the Apes and Star Trek's Ricardo Montalban, as he goes up against Nordberg and by having his gang shoot him dead. And why is O.J. Simpson in this movie, despite this was before the murder he was accused of? And we move on to Frank, along with his captain Ed Hawken, played by George Kennedy, as Frank can't get a woman out of his mind, and which I believe was his ex-wife, while Frank humiliates himself with speaking on a microphone as it was for Weird Al Yankovic, which was pretty funny, as the characters are pretty funny here. Frank visits Nordberg as he tells Frank something, as he makes Nordberg's wife cry a lot by saying the wrong thing every single time, while Ed cheers her up. And Frank learns the ship is called I Love You, spelled with a U and a V, while Queen Elizabeth II is in town, as Frank speaks in a courthouse and afterhand uses the restroom, in which everyone can hear the courthouse. And to me, that was hilarious in a humiliating way. And we move on to the bay, where Nordberg was thrown in and interrogates a man called about Vincent, as we get a narration which isn't necessary about how Frank speaks with Vincent in his home and asks him about the ship called I Love You. And he asks about Nordberg while he flicks a pen in the fish tank and gets pinched by a crab, with a B, by the way. And that's humorous, and it just cracks me up. Frank gets introduced as he's in love with Jane Spencer, instantly played by Priscilla Presley, who's Elvis Presley's widow. And the characters are pretty interesting in a likable, humorous way. And he invites her to dinner as Frank leaves the house, and Vincent asks Jane about Frank while Frank gets back to the police station, as he shoots his car and blows it up. And we get a wacky scientist, Ted Olson, as he invents an anti-graffiti wall while some gangsters are graffitiing the wall. And they get vandalized, which was clever, as he shows Frank his gadgets, which made me think of, this guy is Q from 007. As Ed gives Frank 24 hours to solve the case, as Vincent meets Papschmears, forgive me if I said that wrong, as he demonstrates his way, he invents the way his invention works, and the plot is convincing to me. Frank gets to the hospital and visits Nordberg, and the doctor tries to kill Nordberg, and he runs outside and gets into a car chase while Frank shoots at the car, and he gets in a car for driving school, and the doctor's tires blow up and kills himself into a building, as that chase sequence was hysterical. Like the way the teacher told the student to flip off the truck driver, that was hysterical. And Frank walks home and sees his apartment has been broken in, but as it turns out, it's Jane making dinner for their sometime, as it came that day, and she knows nothing about Vincent's evil plan, and the writing is smart in a way it doesn't take itself too seriously. And the chemistry is pretty good between Leslie Nielsen and Priscilla Presley. They have safe sexual intercourse, and they fall in love with each other as they spend more time together, as she's led to believe he's special to her, And we get words on the screen like we just watched a music video, which wasn't necessary either. And Frank gets a ride from Ed to Vincent's place as he goes in and sneaks around. And Frank learns Vincent's plot as he burns the evidence in the trash can. And we get some humorous slapstick comedy, and this scene, like catching vases, for example. And the comedic timing was genius right out the bat as Frank runs outside while he floors up and almost falls to his death as he accidentally breaks into a woman's apartment. And Mayor Lillian Barkley kicks Frank out of the Queen's presence that very night. And I enjoy the slapstick humor in this movie as it cracks me up. Jane comes by Frank's apartment and she says Vincent wants to talk with him that very night, while Frank is concerned about Jane's safety, and he's led to believe he's a criminal, and he gets there only to get shot by one of his goons with his message saying stay away and we get to Queen Elizabeth II's party as Ed is there, and Frank shows up and sees Ed while Vincent is there, and Jane and Frank are led to believe she's involved. He breaks up with him, or no, he breaks up with her, excuse me, and which makes her sad as Vincent tries to shoot Queen Elizabeth II, but Frank humiliates himself as Frank is kicked off the force. And if anyone has seen any cop movies in the 1980s, you'll know what happens next as Jane comes in the police station giving them the evidence that Vincent wants to shoot Queen Elizabeth II dead, and this is actually very entertaining for me. We get to a baseball game between the California Angels and the Seattle Mariners, in which Queen Elizabeth II attends, as does Victor and Jane, while Frank sneaks into the national anthem singer's room and beats him up, and the head usher picks him up and sings the national anthem wrong, which was humiliating, but I was laughing as he was chased and trade spots with the referee. And we get bloopers and one of them I noticed looked like a dummy, as it was the 1980s, and the Queen throws the ball at one of the players, which felt wired, and the game begins as Frank acts inappropriate towards the players and thinks he's the star of the show, and the game goes on with Frank as the referee and checking players for guns while Randy Newman plays in the background. And the baseball scene does work while Frank acts inappropriately towards the players. We get from inning to inning as we get to the final inning and Frank tries to BS the game as the players and coaches argue with Frank until he pulls out the gun as one of the Angels players is being controlled by Vincent to kill the Queen, as Vincent takes Jane hostage while the ball players beat up one another, as one of the players continues to do what Vincent forces him to do, as Frank accidentally shows a gadget to an audience member and she falls on the player, and Vincent tries to get away as Frank catches up to them as Jane bites Vincent's hand and he falls down and gets squished and is dead, which feels fake. But I get it was 1988, so I'll have to let it go, as Jane almost kills Frank, and Frank says he loves her and proposes her hand in marriage as everyone in the audience watches, as does the players, and they hug it out, and Frank and Jane smooch up a storm, and she accepts his proposal, and Lillian admits she was wrong and takes Frank back to the police squad, promoted as the captain, and Nordberg is in a wheelchair, and Frank accidentally pushes him to the ground as they walk away. And the climax was funny, but how funny was this movie? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 7.0 out of 10. This movie is absolutely amazing as it doesn't take itself too seriously, in which I liked more than Team America and Tropic Thunder, and the characters are pretty funny and sometimes in a humiliating way, as it's humorous and it just cracks me up, and the characters were interesting in a likable, humorous way. The plot is convincing to me as the chase sequences were hysterical, and the writing is smart in a way. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and the chemistry is pretty good between Leslie Nielsen and Priscilla Presley, and their comedic timing was genius right out the bat, but there were a couple of things that weren't really necessary, like the narration, for example. I enjoy the slapstick humor in this movie, which cracks me up, as this movie entertained me from start to finish, as this is a recommendation for this movie. as I was laughing at it, and it does work to this day, and the climax was funny, as this was a very funny movie. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time we'll be back with The Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear. And until then, whoop, whoop, that's the sound of the police.